Everybody in James Madison's party is reluctant to fight. Okay, it's not like everybody's like ready to try to stay neutral. There were a few people who were called war hawks, like the bird, war hawks, and these people who were they were typically older, hot-headed people. They were called war hawks by the Federalists. So these would be like people in James Madison's party. What was James Madison's party?
Democratic Republican.
He's a Democratic Republican because he's a Virginian. He's one of Thomas Jefferson's guys, came after Jefferson. And these war hawks were, they were, because they were of Jefferson's party. To whom are they less likely to endorse? Which foreign power? Of their Jefferson's party, they're less likely to support the British. And so these war hawks were, they were not reluctant to go fight. They were ready to go. Okay, like, hey, let's get this going. They would even speak of how their own fathers whipped the British during the American Revolution. Yet another generation of Americans involved in warfare. They were proud of their fathers. They beat the British single-handedly, and they're remembered fondly the American Revolution and their fathers' heroic acts. So, these war hawks were, people ready to fight. And Western war hawks were even more willing and ready to fight. They yearned to wipe out and to be involved in fighting. And in one such place where the war hawk mentality existed was at the Battle of Tippecanoe. Tippecanoe. Is that what happens when you stand up? Tippecanoe. All right, now Tippecanoe is not really a battle between Americans and British. This is a battle that takes place on the western frontier. So whom do you think this is a fight between? Native Americans and Americans. Okay? So Western war hawks, yearn to wipe out a renewed Indian threat to any pioneer settler who was streaming across the Appalachian wilderness. And as this flood of white people washed through the green forests and mountains of Appalachia, more and more Native Americans are being pushed and pushed and pushed toward the setting sun, toward the west. Okay?
What year was this battle?
The Battle of Tippecanoe, like 1811. So, leading up to this, there were two remarkable brothers who were Shawnee. They were Shawnee, and they were known as Tecumseh, 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 and his brother, whose name is Tenskwatawa. We'll just call him the Prophet, because that's what he was known as, the Prophet. As in, like, the prophet Moses, that kind of prophet, okay? Now, his real name's Tenskwatawa, it's Tenskawata, Tenskwatawa. Known to non-Indians as the prophet. And they were bound and determined to stop the flood of white migration westward. And they began to go from Indian tribe to Indian tribe and unite Native American people together against this flood of white people. And Tecumseh in particular is responsible for inspiring Indian unity, which had always been a problem. Native Americans had fought with themselves ever since the days of Jamestown. Can't unite together in a united front against the enemy of the white people. But Tecumseh is having some success in uniting multiple different groups of Native Americans, multiple different tribes that are all living east of the Mississippi River. And one of the things they did in this Indian unity is have some cultural renewal in the form of they're not going to wear textile clothing. What is textile clothing?
Cloth.
We are all wearing textile clothing. What are they going to wear?
Deerskin.
Buckskins, traditional Native American garb. They're not going to drink alcohol. They forswear alcohol. And they're going to continue to reject the idea of the white man's concept of ownership of land. And if they ever were to cede land to the white man, the majority of Native Americans had to agree. So bringing democracy to themselves. All right? And he's pretty successful in this. Pretty successful. Until the fall of 1811, when the governor of the Indiana Territory, not the state of Indiana does not exist, but the governor of the Indiana Territory, whose name was William Henry Harrison, and there's a picture of him. William Henry Harrison.
Wasn't he a president?
He was for almost 30 days. He gathered an army and he advanced on Tecumseh's headquarters, which were located at the junction of two rivers, the Tippecanoe River and the Wabash River. This is in present-day Indiana, by the way.
Did we win?
Yeah. Tecumseh was not there, though. Tecumseh was absent. He was off recruiting supporters in the South. But his brother Tenskwatawa, also known as the Prophet, was there. And he was in charge. And when he saw William Henry Harrison's army approaching, he foolishly attacked them.
Did he get killed?
Yeah, the entire settlement was burned. Tenskwatawa's body mutilated. The different pieces were sent to the different tribes that were united together. Yay, America! Oh. Oops. Probably shouldn't have done that, right? What this battle is known as, it's called the Battle of Tippecanoe. And it makes William Henry Harrison a national celebrity. National celebrity. They even gets a nickname. They call him Old Tippecanoe. When he runs for president, you know what his slogan is? Tippecanoe and Tyler too, because his running mate was John Tyler. So that was his slogan.
How come he was only president for 30 days?
He died.
That's fine.
Yeah. Especially for him. Okay. Now, so why do we even talk about this? Yeah, some Americans killed some Native Americans. What else is new? Why is this even mentioned? If you are a Native American and you just see all your friends whom you have pledged your allegiance to uniting together, being massacred by the United States of America, to whom are you more likely to support in an upcoming conflict? Not American. So you're more likely to support whom? Great Britain. Okay. So this drove Tecumseh into an alliance with the British. And when America's war with the British came, Tecumseh and his Indian allies fought fiercely for the Redcoats until ultimately Tecumseh dies during the Battle of Thames in 1813. Which is sad for the Native Americans because the dream of Indian unity and an Indian confederation dies with him. That's why the Battle of Tippecanoe is important.
How do you spell that? The Battle of Thames?
Thames. Okay. So this was, the Battle of Tippecanoe itself is part of the War of 1812, but it's kind of a precursor, right? Because it takes place in 1811. So let's talk about the actual war, all right? We know why it starts. We know what the sides are and who's fighting for who and what they're fighting for, okay? What are they fighting for? What are Americans so mad about? Are sailors being impressed into forced labor for the British? There's a bunch of British soldiers still roaming around our country that have not been removed since the American Revolution. What is the British upset about? Us cutting off trade with them, and we're not paying our debt. They want us to pay our debts from the American Revolution. So both sides have some pretty justifiable grievances. But by the spring of 1812, James Madison believed that war with Britain was inevitable. What's inevitable mean? It's going to happen no matter what. After the Battle of Tippecanoe had already happened, and the British are taking advantage of Tecumseh and their loyalty to the British because they begin to arm hostile Native Americans and push them into America, push them eastward to engage, white people in the battle. Not to mention, James Madison has a significant portion of his own party. Hey, let's go kill British people, the Warhawks. Okay, so, not to mention, the eyes of the world are kind of on us. We're still a baby nation. We're still in our infancy in 1812. And if America could not fight to protect itself, our experiment in democracy and republicanism is ultimately going to fail. The eyes of the world would be like, see, I told you this letting the people be in charge rule doesn't work. We need a strong monarch. We need dictatorship. That's what you got to have in order to be tough and survive. So, this war, the War of 1812, is kind of like a test, by our people to whether we are worthy to persevere, whether our enterprise and democracy can sustain. Is it just an idea that's pleasant to think about but not really work, or is it something that can be sustainable across the globe? We already know the answer to that because what's the government of most countries in the world today? Democracy. At this time, America is the only one. Okay? So, James Madison asks Congress to declare war on June 1st, 1812. He asks Congress to declare war. The president cannot declare war. That can only be done by Congress. But he asks Congress to declare war. And after 2 weeks of deliberation, Congress obliged him with a pretty lopsided vote to declare war on.
The president could declare war.
The president has no power to declare war.
What date was it?
Pardon?
What date was it?
June 1st, 1812 is when he asks, and 2 weeks later it happens. So, support for the war is coming predominantly from places in the South and places in the West. Why don't you think the North is getting in on the fighting? Who are the people that are most likely to support a war with Great Britain? Are the Democratic Republicans, which are located primarily where? In the South. All right, because the Federalists are mainly located in the North, and they are pro-Britain. All right. So, also, why would it be people in the West? Because they're the ones getting attacked by Native Americans, and they want to get some help. All right, excellent. So, there was also significant support from people in Pennsylvania and also in Virginia. So, Federalists were pretty much clearly against it, but the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans were definitely for it. Okay, all right. So, Now I don't want to. I don't want to do like the entire war and battle by battle. There's a lot of fighting actually in Canada, and on the Great Lakes. There were these big sea like naval battles that took place on the Great Lakes, and many war heroes emerged. But there are a couple battles I want to talk to you about, and some high points about the War of 1812 that you should know. Okay, most importantly, what you need to know: why it started, and who it's fought between, and how it comes to an end. All right, so before we do that, we'll talk about this place and this guy. You ever heard of this guy? Who? Francis Scott Key. Who's he?
Wasn't he stuck in a battle?
Yeah, he was actually aboard. He was a captured prisoner. He was on board a British vessel. He's an American, and he was put on board this ship that was a prisoner ship. And this ship was located in a harbor outside the city of Baltimore in Maryland. And the name of the fort in which the British were attacking was called Fort McHenry. It's still there. There's a picture of it in the middle. You can go visit it. It's in Baltimore. And the British are trying to get a foothold in the Chesapeake Bay and advance rapidly onto Washington, D.C. And in doing so, they had to siege the fort. And they shot rockets and bombs and bullets and tried to attack. Well, they did attack and try to overtake the fort all throughout a battle that occurred one night. And Francis Scott Key, scared to death, aboard a ship out in the middle of the harbor, had a front row seat. And the only way he knew that the fort was able to sustain the British onslaught is by seeing that the American flag was still flying over it the next morning. And that inspired him to write a poem, not a song, a poem, which he entitled The Star-Spangled Banner. And it actually has like 40 verses. We only know the first one. There's a lot more to the Star-Spangled Banner than just what we sing. Because it's a poem. And then that tune, over time, the poem gets set to a tune to a popular drinking song that people would sing in pubs. And that's the tune that it gets set to. And then eventually it becomes our national anthem. Long after Francis Scott Key's gone, it becomes our national anthem. It's one of the only national anthems on planet Earth that talks about like rockets and bombs and war and violence. Yay, America. Yes, ma'am.
France's national anthem is also pretty violent.
Yeah.
It's
Well, I mean, they did cut people's heads off for sport for a while,
Like the blood of our wives and children.
Yeah. All right, so that's Fort McHenry, Francis Scott Key, Star-Spangled Banner became very popular. Okay, and all this that's part of the War of 1812. Now, does this event have absolutely any importance or bearing on the outcome of the war? No, this is just kind of something that happened and is part of American history and culture now. Everybody got that? Okay. All right, now, to talk to you a little bit about the War of 1812. What's that? That's the White House. Uh-oh. Yeah, not good. Not good. The War of 1812 itself is in terms of scope of American violence, it is a small war. It's small, okay? It involves about 6,000 Americans dying or being wounded, okay? There are battles in the Civil War where that many people die in the first 10 minutes, okay? So as far as the war itself goes, it's not, 6,000 people dead, that's a big deal. But over 3 or 4 years of fighting, comparatively, it's a small battle or small war, okay? the fighting that was going on in Europe at this time, 1,000 times worse than our little war of 1812. Okay, our republic shows that it would resist, that it can resist with a sword in hand. Whenever it feels as though we are being wronged, we will protect ourselves. It does show the world that we will do that. And other nations begin to develop a new respect for America's fighting ability, even though it's not, something that we really win. But in a diplomatic sense, if not really a military sense, the conflict could be called the Second War for America's independence. I mean, we're fighting the British again, and we're trying to, get rid of them, trying to shake them off our backs, get out of our country. War heroes do emerge out of the War of 1812. We've already talked about William Henry Harrison, who became famous for winning what battle? Battle of Tippecanoe. Another war hero who emerged was already pretty well known as an Indian fighter, known for killing Native Americans. But he also became a national celebrity, a household name, and his name is Andrew Jackson. Both Andrew Jackson and William Henry Harrison, what's in the future for them? President of the United States. So the fact that we choose celebrities to be president is not a new idea. That's what these guys were. They were celebrities. All right? So war heroes emerged. Both Jackson and Harrison were Indian fighters. Both of them later became president. Now Jackson's battle that he becomes famous for is the Battle of New Orleans.
What year is that?
1815. When does the War of 1812 end? 1814. Yeah. Well, there's no I guess he didn't get the text message that it was over. The war ended, and then they fought the battle before they knew the war was over. Okay? So that's an interesting fact about the Battle of New Orleans, that it's fought after the war's over, and we win. Yeah, how convenient. Okay, so let me see here. All right, so we know that Washington is burned to the ground. New Orleans is defended by Andrew Jackson, and the war comes to an end. What ends the War of 1812? Anybody know? Who can say it? Huh?
Is it Paris? Oh, Gent.
Treaty of what?
Gent.
Yeah. Only people in southern West Virginia say Gent. Because we have a town called Gent. We call it is Gent. Everywhere else on earth, it's Ghent. It's Ghent. Right. I understand. We have a town called Gent. It's Gent. If you say, hey, I'm from Ghent, people are going to look at you like you got three heads. Because it's not Ghent, it's Gent. But everywhere else on the earth, this is the Treaty of Ghent.
So if we say Treaty of Gent anywhere else on earth, people are going to look at us like that.
Well, why is it called the Treaty of Ghent?
Was it made in Gent?
It was made in Ghent, Belgium.
Oh.
Okay? There's a city in Belgium called Ghent, which is where our Gent gets its name. But we don't call it Ghent, we call it Gent. Okay, ladies and gents? Okay. All right, so the thing about it is we send 5 American peacemakers to the quaint Belgian city of Ghent in 1814. In 1814, headed up by a very young early rising, intelligent man named John Quincy Adams. John Adams' son. And along with another, one of my favorite Americans of all time, the hard-living, card-playing, heavy-drinking Henry Clay, who is involved in American politics for, it seems like, a century. Henry Clay is at the Treaty of Ghent, 1814. Henry Clay is up making compromises all the way up until the 1850s. He is a fixture of American politics for the next half century. Okay?
This is like old as crap, like silent stuff.
Yeah, well, not in 1814. He would be, in your words, young as crap. Okay? All right, so the Treaty of Ghent, signed on Christmas Eve, 1814, is essentially just an armistice. What does the word armistice mean?
Agreeing to put down arms.
Mm-hmm. Both sides just stopped fighting.
Then why did the Battle of New Orleans happen?
They didn't know it was over. They didn't know an armistice had been signed. Word had not gotten from Belgium to New Orleans. Okay? So, both sides simply agreed to stop fighting, and any territory that was conquered was to be restored. You know, if we took territory from them in Canada, we're going to give it back. You know, they occupied Washington, D.C., they're going to give it back. And we're just going to stop fighting. And that's it. So it's really just a tie. Is there any mention about like the British impressing our sailors? Any mention about the British leaving? We just fought for a while, and then we stopped fighting. Nothing really happened. I mean, a lot happened, but nothing really changed as a result of the War of 1812. You know, there's no mention of, are the British going to stop inciting Native Americans to fight us and arming them? Any mention of search and seizure of our ships, or impressment of our sailors, or confiscation of American trade good merchant ships? No. They just said, okay, we'll just stop shooting at each other. And that's the Treaty of Ghent, which does bring an end to the conflict, but does nothing to resolve the issues that started it. Is that good diplomacy? Not really. I mean, it's good that we're not killing each other anymore, but do you see that there could be some potential for violence in the future? Yeah. This is a political cartoon created more recently about the Treaty of Ghent and the War of 1812. The guy in the red coat, who is he? British. And then the other guy is who? America. And they're pointing at each other saying, you lost. You lost. You lost. But ultimately, there's a guy leaning up against the wall there. Who's he represent? And what's he saying?
We lost.
Who really lost?
Literally them.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can see that this is like there's a banner in the back that says the bicentennial. What's bicentennial?
Like 50?
200. So it'd be like, this would maybe 2012. This was created. And to a large extent, the political cartoonist here is accurate in this depiction. Because, yeah, the British, you know, it's all bravado and like trying to be macho, like, yeah, we kicked your butt in the War of 1812. Americans can say that because they did in Canada. But then the British can be like, hey, we burned your capital down and set your White House on fire. We kicked your butt. And they can point fingers and do that. But all the while, does anything really get resolved with Native Americans? No. And you can't really find any Native Americans now to ask them about. They're almost extinct. Okay? So that's a pretty poignant to the important political cartoon. Okay? So questions on the War of 1812 and the Treaty of Ghent. All right, so it is important, though, because it does bring about some changes internally in America, okay? Not probably, but the greatest of these of what it brings, the most impressive byproduct of the War of 1812 is a heightened sense of nationalism. Nationalism. If we had vocabulary, nationalism would be a vocabulary word. What is nationalism?
Pride in your country.
That's exactly right. Pride in your own country. All the way up to this point, if I lived in America in, let's say, 1810, and I traveled to France, just on vacation, brought my family, and I went to France, and somebody from France said, "Hey, where are you from?" I would answer them and say, "I am from Virginia," or "I am from Georgia," or "I am from Pennsylvania." I would say the name of my state because I have more allegiance and more pride in my state than I do in my nation. After the War of 1812, there's an increase, a rise in nationalism, whereas if I went and traveled to France and somebody said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm an American. I'm from the United States." So there is a massive shift in the thought processes of American citizens after the War of 1812. An increase in nationalism, all right? The spirit and consciousness of our own nation, okay? We're national oneness. We're all Americans, okay? And the War of 1812 does a lot to forge that and bring us together, okay? That is an extremely important effect of the War of 1812, okay? That heightened sense of nationalism. Plus, we can all bind together and be like, "Look, we whipped the British twice. Most powerful people on earth. We beat them twice. Even if we really didn't. Does it matter? Do we believe we did? Is that all that matters? Yeah. If people believe it, why isn't it true?" Okay? So, that's also an important thing. And you'll see this, that last little square talks about the era of good feelings. The era of good feelings begins with a popular president and booming national economy. We're going to talk a lot about that. Okay? All right. So I actually don't want to start the next thing because it is a big idea. It's called the American system, and I don't want to break it up into pieces. I want to do it all one day. Okay? So I'll put this on Schoology, and if you guys have questions, I will answer them.